What, you thought we were done with viewport stabilization? We didn't even talk about the two-pointer or two-finger scenario, where this time we need to account for both location, rotation, and scale, all three of these at the same time. And this time we're going to be using drivers, so none of this dilly-dallying constraint stuff. No, this is going to be substantially harder. It's going to have some math. So if you haven't seen the first viewport stabilization tutorial, maybe, just an idea, maybe do that. So again, the idea here is viewport compositing, stacking layers here instead of doing compositing workspace. How do we stabilize here for, location, rotation, and scale? So, assuming you've already imported in your footage, and this time I've actually done the work for us, because, we already did it. We don't need to go over it a million times until our bones decompose, right? We can just get right to it. We have the footage imported. Again, I made sure that the frame rate 59.94 is matching, render tab, view transform is set to standard, all of these things, and really all that's left to do is to track and stabilize. For tracking, again, without too much theory, you're going to control click here and control click here, and I get it. This is kind of like the ideal scenario, control T to track. Yeah, this is the ideal scenario for tracking. However, you know what? Sometimes it really is this easy, and we're just meant to illustrate a point here. So once you have your two trackers here, whether it be two fingers or two objects in your scene, point is two objects or 2 points that you want to stabilize, like in reference to each other. What we're going to do is pretty much the same workflow. Start off by selecting both trackers, just like last time, reconstruction, link empty to track. Again, this takes our tracker information, and you can see it creates two trackers, which we can call like left and right, even though, whatever. My left, their right. Well, I can't even spell rightly correctly. Yeah, it creates two trackers, and it's going to bring those pieces of information into the 3D viewport. So you can see now we have a camera with two trackers that, again, are dependent on the position of the camera. So no matter where we move this, the trackers are going to be in some sense correct, okay? To make this a bit nicer, let's get rid of the cube, let's get rid of the light, and for the camera, I'm just going to position this above the XY plane so we don't have to care about the Z axis. And last time I said, it's kind of optional. This time, fucking do it, okay? It's very important to keep this math simple, okay? And this is kind of a big contributing factor. You can see again from our camera point of view, we can actually make these a bit smaller, although I guess there's no point. Point is, from the camera point of view, you can see we have our trackers. Let's import in our footage as a plane, because again, we're doing viewport compositing. So just make sure, and you could do this accurately. I will not be doing it accurately. I'm just going to be eyeballing it, as the Mayans used to call it. We're going to have a plane right here that is perfectly fitted to the bounds of the camera, right? And these trackers should be moving corresponding to where it would be on the footage, right? And just to verify, shading workspace, we're going to give this a material, call it footage or maybe foot age. What we're going to do is we are going to import our image texture. Again, movie clips are imported through this image texture node, even though images aren't videos, I get it. Import in the same piece of footage. Make sure your frames are either the correct number or some unbelievably large number, like 6,000, doesn't matter. Just make sure there are enough frames to go around and enable both of these, making it so that when we go to the render tab, we now have our footage projected on a plane that, again, the trackers are moving along. At this point, we can no longer move the camera unless we do some parenting stuff. Otherwise, the trackers are going to be in the wrong place, right? So for now, we're going to keep the camera stationary. So three things to stabilize: location, rotation, and scale. Starting off with location, this one is actually immediately harder than the original. And the original, we had one tracker, so we could do a copy location constraint and do the inverse. This time, what we're going to do is we're going to have the stabilized location be the average, the midpoint between these two trackers. Or you could just have it be either of these trackers, but I want it to be stabilized in between them. Okay? To do that, what we are going to do is we are going to add in a driver. So you right click, add driver, and I wouldn't blame you if you haven't seen this menu before. It is fairly complicated. This is where the Python and the math comes in, but I will guide you through it. So if we think about an averaged value, we got to do this on X and Y, but not on Z, since again, we pointed our camera downwards. An average value is you just add both of them and then divide by 2. Nothing complicated. And ideally, right, we do have this averaged value type right here. However, in this case, we're not going to be able to use it for a technical reason. Point is, remember, stabilization is taking the tracker information and applying the inverse. So if our average location is like plus 0.5 on x, we need to go negative 0.5 on x to stabilize. We counteract the movement, okay? Okay, so let's move on. So we need two variables in here. First one's just going to be called variable. We're going to take our left tracker, in other words, this one, unless I, messed up the names, back to edit driver, and we're going to take the x location of this. We're going to copy and paste this. Again, we need the x value of both of these. So for our second variable, which we can call not var, but like war or war, I don't know. No, I'm not getting too creative here. Let's call it war. This is going to be the right. So in other words, the other tracker, x location. So now we have both of these pieces of information. For the expression, we just use these two variables in some kind of mathematical expression, right? So the average, again, is going to be the variable plus the other variable. And then we take this and then divide it by 2. Again, this is the average x location. Again, though, this is going to create a bit of an issue. So if we update dependencies and just use this, you're going to see that, don't focus on the y-axis for now, but just the x-axis. You can see it almost seems like the movement is being amplified, right? It's doing the exact opposite of what it's supposed to be doing, right? Because of this, again, whenever you move, you need to do the inverse or the reciprocal or whatever it means in this case. In this case, the inverse just means, putting a negative sign in front of this. So when we move right, we're telling the driver to move left. And by the way, just in case of parentheses and all this, it should be fine. I'm going to put all these in parentheses and then put a negative outside of it. So it's taking this average value and making it negative, update dependencies. And you can see, at least on the x-axis, it does seem now that it's going to the midpoint, right? And you're thinking, oh, so much more work to do the y-axis. No, it's actually the exact same thing, right? So we just copy this driver, we paste it. By the way, this was a feature added in 2.82, I believe, for you Blender historians. You didn't always used to be able to paste drivers. It used to be a lot of work. But for this other driver, so this is the y expression, all we need to do is, again, we want this negative average, except this time we are going to take the y locations of var and war, the left and right trackers, update dependencies. And you can see that these driver values are updating as we go frame by frame, and it really does look like the midpoint is, is what is being stabilized to. In other words, the 3D cursor should exactly be the midpoint between these two fingers or trackers or whatever. Okay, cool. That shouldn't have been too bad. If it was, I pity you, because the next part's going to be fucking brutal in that case, right? We've done location, and now we want rotation. And rotation is a bit harder to talk about because we don't really have like some angle that we can kind of take the negative of. Again, if we rotate clockwise by 20 degrees, stabilizing is rotating counterclockwise by 20 degrees, right? Just making a negative sign. However, we don't know what angle we're using here. So in some way, we need to take our two trackers and compute the angle between both of them, which doesn't really make sense. So here's what I want you to picture. I want you to take these two trackers, right? Both of these trackers that have our information. Imagine a line that is connecting them, or a vector, which is, really what we're going to be doing. The vector between both of these two, that is going to have some angle with like the x-axis, right? So for this, it's going to be like, I don't know, 15 degrees off of here. Could I use annotate tool? So I want you to imagine a line between both these trackers, and we're looking at the x-axis, worst drawing of all time, and we care about this angle, okay? That's the idea here. Can I undo annotations? So cool. That's the angle we're computing. To do that, we need trigonometry. Tangent gives us from an angle, it gives us opposite over adjacent. So, now we do arctangent, inverse tangent. If you didn't take trigonometry, literally just copy what I'm about to type. So we need the inverse tangent of opposite over adjacent. In other words, change of y divided by change of x, that quantity, arctangent, okay? For rotation, we actually are not messing with x or y rotation because you can see those gives us kind of weird rotations. We only care about z-axis. So while it's more complicated, we only have a single driver. So let's add in a driver. Okay, so again, what we're going to need to do is take an arctangent. This is this function that gives us the angle back from the original vector. But for the original vector, we're going to need the change of y over change of x. In other words, the slope. To do that, we're going to need 4 variables. The first one we can call variable. This time, let's do a bit better of a naming convention. Variable x. This is going to be the same thing as last time. We're going to take our left tracker and take the x location. Fine. I'm then going to copy this and then do the same thing, but this time we're going to call it war or war x. And this is going to be the same thing, but for the right tracker. So we have our x locations for both trackers. I'm then going to paste it 2 more times, and now we care about the y location. So this is going to be var y, and this is going to be war or war y, wario time, what was I talking about? We need the y location, so this is going to be the left y location, and this is going to be the right. I guess we need to update this. This is going to be the right y location, okay? So make sure we have, why can I not find it? I just had a bit of a little brain aneurysm. But either way, we now have 4 variables, the left and right x locations and the left and right y locations. For the expression, here is what we're going to do. First of all, we need to calculate the slope. So we're going to have, parentheses divided by parentheses. So the change in y, in other words, the rise over the run, right? So the rise is going to be, let's say, var y minus var, var y. So again, we are taking the 2 y locations and subtracting them from each other just to get the change in y-axis between these 2 trackers. For the x, same thing, var x minus var x. Probably should have come up with a better naming convention. And we could just update the dependencies. Right now, this is going to give us not the correct thing at all for a couple of reasons. But you can see that at least it is rotating in some way that is based off this slope, right? So you can see it's kind of working at least. Couple updates. First of all, we need to extract the angle from this. So this whole quantity I'm going to put in parentheses, and hopefully we don't get a glitch here because sometimes it has happened. All of this, we are going to take the arctangent, which in Python kind of speech is atan, right? That stands for arctangent. And let's update dependencies. So now, again, we are taking the slope, rise over run, change in y over change of x, taking arctangent to extract the angle, and now you can see it's just a bit smoother, right? Okay, cool. Again, the reason this isn't working is for every kind of stabilization, whether it be location, rotation, or scale, we use the inverse transformation. So again, if we rotate by this amount of degrees, the opposite is going to be what? It's going to be rotating by the negative, or changing orientation from clockwise to counterclockwise, which really is as easy as putting a negative sign here, although we might need parentheses, although that seems to be fine. And you can see that now we have rotation stabilized for. So if you were to kind of imagine a line going through here, wow, that I guess wasn't the way to go. I thought annotations, do I have to put it on the first frame? I thought annotations lasted. There we go. Or I guess they only last for a while unless I dive into annotation settings, which I will not be doing. But you can see generally they stay along this line. They do drift up and down because, again, we're taking the average. We're taking the average here. But in terms of the angle, you can see it's staying pretty flat. Okay, so next operation is going to be what? It's going to be scale, and this is another one that's actually fairly easy. In fact, for this one, whatever we do for the driver here, we're also going to do on the y because we need uniform scaling, right? So we change x and y together. For this, the reciprocal is going to be kind of I kind of gave it away. The inverse, rather, is going to be the reciprocal, which is different from the others. Other times we took the additive inverse, we put a negative sign. This time we're going to need to divide, and we'll talk about that in a second. So for the scaling, let's add in a driver for the x-axis. For this one, we have a great expression. So in the same way we couldn't use average value before because we needed to put a negative sign and won't let you do that, this time we can actually just mess with, let's go back to scripted expression. This time we can actually mess with the variable type, and luckily, by the way, rotational difference would not have helped us, so don't worry about that. We didn't waste time. I tried this, doesn't work. Distance is actually going to give us exactly the distance, at least in a world space, between 2 objects. Again, if we want to change scaling, if 2 objects are very close, we want the plane to be, very small or big, one of the two, and vice versa, right? So the scaling is going to be related to the distance. For this, we can literally just take the distance between the left and the right tracker. So again, this variable stores the world space difference between these two. So let's update dependencies. And for the expression, without adding one, let's start with the variable. So just the variable. Again, this is only going to affect the x-axis. There we go. You can see, just like last time, this is kind of doing the inverse transformation. As my fingers get closer on the footage, the plane shrinks on the x-axis, whereas we want the opposite, so the distance between them is preserved. And as they're far away, it's getting bigger. We want the opposite, right? So in this case, we do not want the negative, because that's just going to flip it, right? If we just put negative, not use self, if we just put in a negative here, you can see it just flips the footage. Right? In this case, the inverse is going to be a reciprocal relationship. So 1 divided by the variable. Okay? Let's think about why this is the case. Because we want kind of the volume to be preserved in some sense. I mean, this really isn't maybe the way to think about it, but if the distance, let's think about it like this, if the distance between the fingers gets twice as close, 2 times closer, well, then of course the plane should be 2 times bigger, right? A times 2 should be accounted for with a times 2 in the other direction, or a halving. Same thing with a third and 3, a fourth and 4. In other words, reciprocal. Whatever number x, we take 1 over x. If you're not convinced, think about it a bit, right? 1 divided by the variable, okay? And in fact, we can just right-click, copy the driver. Again, the y-axis should be using the same thing, paste driver, and now we have a uniform scaling. And you can see now it kind of looks like it's correct. Sometimes, kind of like an optical illusion, it might look like they're a bit closer together, but that's just because the fingers are so extremely close together when I did it in the motion. Usually, when you're stabilizing, you're not going to have such insane changes in location, rotation, and scale. But if we were to kind of like put our 2 fingers on the screen, like for real, like here and here, just to measure the distance, you're going to notice that even the distance when they're very close together, although the annotations are gone, are roughly this distance apart, right? This stuff is conserved. Let's get rid of these annotations. So in other words, takeaway, location, you take a negative average, rotation, you take a negative arctangent expression, and scale, you take a reciprocal relationship. By the way, if you want to preserve this relationship but just start with a bit more scaling, quick trick is we could just add a tiny bit of quantity, or in fact, you could think this should work. You could multiply everything by 2, and we're going to do this for both of them. So in other words, it's going to keep the same reciprocal relationship, but it's just going to start off 2 times bigger, right? So this time it's kind of still taking up most of the camera, but it's keeping that reciprocal relationship. And you could put whatever number you want there. Again, z-axis doesn't matter. So long story short, we now know how to stabilize. Is there anything else to go over when it comes to this? I don't think so. Again, there are many different things you could do for location. You could actually just stabilize on one of the trackers, or you could have a dampening for any of these where you could multiply them by like a number like 0.2, so stabilization is only like 20% as effective. There's a lot you can do here with drivers, but I think that's the essence of the tutorial, right? This one had a lot of math, but you lived, you made it to the end, congratulations. And with a congratulations, I want to do my outro. So first of all, thank you guys for watching the tutorial. I hope you learned something. If you have questions, I'm sure other people can answer them in the comments. And if you are interested in stuff that was not in this tutorial, aka exclusive tutorials that are not on the CG Matter or default cube channels, like exclusive tutorials, blend files like this one that I'm going to upload so you can mess with this, or even just rip these drivers and swap the footage with something else, all of these things are going to be available on the Patreon. Right? This is a place to get all blend files, including this one, anything I've ever uploaded, hundreds, thousands even, but really just hundreds of blend files are going to be there. Additionally, exclusive tutorials, behind the scenes access, early access to some tutorials that I post early, although admittedly I don't do it that often. Discord access, stuff like that. I want to thank all 500 some active patrons that are actively funding both of these channels. I hope that you are enjoying your benefits, and yeah, I want to thank all 500 some patrons that are, in some sense, or in every sense, the producers of these tutorials, and hence you guys are in the credits. I talk about this every time, but it is true. And I just want to emphasize again, I always put this Patreon kind of announcement at the end of the tutorial so that it's not intrusive and that, you know, you actually get a tutorial before I even pitch the thing. But you do get a shitload, if I may, a bunch of stuff in return, depending on the tier you have. So Patreon exists. Get it if you want. If you don't. Nobody's forcing you. And yeah, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this free tutorial. And other than that, that's it. So bye.